Hey there, welcome to Let's Code. Today is the third day of our JavaScript coding series. Today we are going to learn about data types. So head on into your terminal, or you can straightforward open VS Code, but I'm choosing to do it this way. Changing directory into my desktop, and then I'll head on to my 30 days folder. Then in there I'll open my VS Code, or simply you can use the Windows key and the E, go to desktop, then actually take the folder, drag and drop it in VS Code, and it will open for you automatically. Okay, so this was where we left off, and now we are going to continue with data types. Actually, let me bring it back. Then let's continue with data types. Okay, so when we create variables, we give them values. They are data that we are inputting, and each data has a particular type. So the types of data that we can actually set as values for a variable include primitive and then non-primitive data types. Those are the types of data that we have. So today we are going to consider primitive data types. Okay, so the first question is, what is primitive data types? Basically, primitive data types are data types that are immutable, that is, they cannot be changed. So they are string, we have boolean, we have numbers, we have undefined, and then we have null. So these are the basic primitive data types that we have. So let's take it one by one and then go through each one of them. So we are starting with strings. Okay, so how do we define strings in JavaScript? Strings are basically combination of characters. When we say characters, we are referring to alphabet and then various English symbols. So character can be a semicolon, character can be an exclamation sign, character can be any letter within the English alphabet or other languages as well. Those are characters, or we can also refer to it as sentences. Okay, so how do we define a string in JavaScript? How do the computer know we've actually written a string? So whenever we use quotes, double quotes, or backticks, so there are three. Whenever we use single quotes, double quotes, or backticks, anything we write between this is considered as a string. Anything, it doesn't matter if we write words in addition with numbers, it is considered as string, same as backticks as well. Okay, now what is a boolean? Boolean is either true or false values. So it's either true or it is either false. And then numbers are basically positive and then negative integers. In C programming, we would have distinguished between floats and the rest, but in JavaScript, we consider floats and all those ints and the rest as numbers. So numbers can be in decimals, that is the floating numbers, or it can be in negative and positive integers. So those are numbers. And then we have undefined. Basically, just as we did earlier, undefined is when you don't give value to a variable, it results to undefined. Or when a function does not return anything, it results to undefined. And then null means nothing. So mostly people get undefined and null confused, but we will go into it and then you really understand the difference between null and then undefined. So let's say now we want to take our first name variable, and notice something. What we are doing here is called variable mutation. That is, when you already assign a value to a variable and then you are changing the value, okay, that one is called variable mutation. And you see, when you declare a variable without assigning a value to it, we don't call it mutation. That one is initialization. When you call that variable and then you give it a value, that one is called initialization. But when you have already given it a value, that is when you have already initialized it and then you are giving it a different value after you've already initialized a value, that one is called variable mutation. So what I'm doing over here is variable mutation. I want to change the first name I gave over there, and then I want to use Gabriel. Okay, then I'll bring my semicolon. Then I'll do a console log of my first name. And you see, we have console log on the line 4 and we have console log on the line 15. So let's now head into our terminal and then let's type in load, because I'm already in my desktop folder, specifically 30 days folder. I can type in load main.js and my code will be executed. So now you can see over here, even though we have variables over here and we already initialized first name with Michael, but you see when it comes down here, our first name that was printed was a Michael, but then it was changed from Michael to Gabriel. So if you like, let me omit this console log and then run my code again, and you're going to see Gabriel is going to be the only thing that is printed. So the way JavaScript executes is it executes according to line. So it moves from the first line to the second line to the third line. That's how JavaScript executes. So when you change or mutate the value of a variable along the line, when it reaches that particular line, it goes back to the variable. That is, it goes back into the system and then tells the system to change the value that has been given to the allocated space to that particular variable. Okay, so that's it. So it doesn't matter whenever you console log after you have mutated a value, you are going to get the mutated value. So that is strength. And then we can change this to through. Okay, you see when we mutate it and then we print console log, you see we are getting true over here. Now this is no longer called strings, so you can see we are not using the single quotes, double quotes, or the backticks. So this shows you it's a boolean. The moment we put backticks or any string identifier over there, that changes it from a boolean to a string. So this one is no more a boolean but a string, unless we remove the quotes from there before we can now call it a boolean. Okay, so numbers 2, can have from -1, 0, like any. And then undefined is when we don't give it any value over here. So here, let's just remove the mic from here, and then let's just console log first name and see what happens over here. You can see we have a value of undefined. That means we have created the value, the variable, but we have not initialized it. That's why we are getting undefined. At the moment we set it to equal to a particular value, we are not going to get undefined, but get that particular value we set it to. And null actually means nothing. Okay, so sometimes we mostly set a variable to equal null, which means nothing, or sometimes functions can return nothing, so it's going to give you null and return. Okay, so basically that is it for this video, but we are going to dive much deeper into the primitive and non-primitive types for you to understand the two really well. And then we said a term which is immutable. I think you don't really get that concept yet, but I won't explain it over here to overwhelm you. As we go on and we take the non-primitive data types, I will explain that concept for you to really understand.